have two guests on the podcast today, and they've made something extraordinary together. The first drew queer Britain into being for 60 years and quietly refused to call any of it art. He published the world's first LGBTQ+ graphic novel in 1983, drew for Gay News, Capital Gay and The Guardian, made safer sex campaigns through the AIDS crisis and hung a 19-metre banner at Carrow Road for Justin Fashanu. All work, never art. That guest is cartoonist David Shenton. The artist who finally insisted otherwise is Ian Giles. Ian's artwork is rooted in queer histories and the slow, generous work of collaborating with the pioneers who came before him. He shows at places like the Whitechapel, Mima, MoMA, PS1 and the Stedelijk, but the heart of his work happens earlier, in cups of tea, long phone calls and the building of trust. He found David's book 40 Lies, kept the idea of a retrospective on his phone like a wish for years, then quietly emailed Norwich Castle and asked if they would help him make it real. They said yes. Together they've made Kindly Ease the Tension, David's first ever institutional retrospective. It begins with a small burnt doll thrown into the fire by his father. The doll survived. So did the boy. In this conversation, we get into what happens when somebody finally calls your 60 years of work art. We talk about the duvet of love, an AIDS memorial that they never meant to be art. We talk about the trans baton being passed in a moment when many in the gay community have gone quiet. We talk about censorship and the rising conservatism in the arts, the works that have to be shown after hours, the double standard between classical nudity and queer images. And we talk about what intergenerational care actually looks like in practice. Tea, listening, 2 years of meetings, a loft full of cardboard cutouts. David is 77 and says this retrospective has stretched his horizon by another 10 years. There's a lesson in that for all of us. Welcome to the Extraordinary Creators podcast. So great to have you here. Would you do us the honour of introducing yourselves for our listeners, saying where you're joining us from today and how would you describe what you do in your own words?
Oh, hi, I'm David Shenton. I live in Norwich in England, and I'm a queer cartoonist. And this is how I'm described in the cover of my book. It says, David Shenton has been creating LGBTQ cartoons and comics since the 1970s, when his work started appearing in publications such as Gay News and Capital Gay. Along with cartoonists such as Alison Bechdel and Kate Charlesworth, David has been at the forefront exploring LGBT life and issues through cartoon and comic art in the late 20th century. Alongside his career as an artist, he has also taught literacy and art at Norwich Prison, Hackney College, and worked in the Bug House at London Zoo.
Thank you. I'm glad you got that bit in. Thank you, David.
Welcome.
Over to you, Ian.
And I'm Ian Giles. I'm an artist. I normally live in North London, but I'm very pleased to be here today with David in Norwich. I make work really for the last 5-10 years about the queer experience, particularly looking at LGBTQI+ histories through archives and actually directly meeting a lot of the pioneering people behind things like the Gay Liberation Front, which is a movement that happened after Stonewall, so in the 1970s. And I've been lucky enough to work with people such as Everyone Involved, who were the first band to ever record a gay protest song onto vinyl. And I've also made work about Butt magazine, which is a gay male magazine from the noughties. I'm really interested in those working a little bit before me, but maybe have made my life as a gay person a little bit more easy to live. I'm really interested in learning those stories and using the platforms that are afforded to me, museums and art galleries, to kind of think about and share those ideas. I think the other thing is that this week is my first week back into the real world. My husband and I just had our second child, a baby girl born via surrogacy. So I've been out for 7 months, and so this is the first time David and I have seen each other since September. So yeah, it's nice to be kind of creeping back out into the world.
Well, it's so brilliant to have you both with us because you're working together right now on Kindly Ease the Tension, which is David's first institutional retrospective, 60 years of work curated by you, Ian, at Norwich Castle. To bring it alive for our listeners, could you each tell us what this project is and from where you sit inside it? Tell us a bit about things from your perspective.
You better start that because you started it off.
Well, I guess, David and we must have met, or at least I heard about you back in about 2018. I was part of a bigger commission called New Geographies, which happened in the east of England. And it was a commission for 10 artists to respond to sites that had been chosen by the public across the east of England. And artists were paired with different institutions. I actually went on to work with Kettle's Yard and First Sight galleries over here. But my partner in the project was an organisation in Great Yarmouth called Original Projects, spearheaded by this amazing curator, artist, community organiser called Carvis Clayton and his partner Jules Devonshire. Anyway, I was outside Carvis's house and someone came past and I said, I'm basically looking to meet as many gay and queer people in the east of England as I possibly can. And someone said, you must meet David Shenton. He's so amazing. And I think at that point she said that you were weaving plastic bags.
Oh yes, it was called something about rubbish. It said, what's all this rubbish? It was an exhibition called What a Load of Rubbish. It was called What a Load of Rubbish, and I was just collecting old carrier bags off the beaches and cutting them into strips and knitting them into bath mats.
Nice.
And then I guess to cut a long story short, to stop myself from yabbering on in terms of all the ways that David and I connected over those years, really. I was really struck by David's work. We were able to work a little bit together on that project. You came and ran an event at Outpost Gallery in Norwich.
Yeah, we had a board game
day, nice cups of tea and things. And then I basically keep a little list on my phone. I guess as my phone has slowly become my sketchbook, I always used to keep a pencil and paper sketchbook. And actually, I really would love to go back to that. I feel like I've got to get back to the paper. I keep a list of things that I would love to do, artworks I'd love to make. And one of the things wasn't an artwork. It was this idea that I really wanted to live in a world where there was a David Shenton retrospective, because I think you'd made 40 Lies, this book, which is
it's 3 years old now.
Because 40 Lies is an anagram.
It's an anagram of life story. But then the word underneath it says a work of ipsidixitism, and ipsidixitism means if I say it's true, it's true. So the whole thing, and it actually tells you that all these stories in here are actually true, but not. They're all lies as well. So you each one's got a big grain in it, and you have to choose which bit you want to believe and which bit you think, oh, that's rubbish.
But I think it was reading this book, this kind of compendium of everything that David's done in terms of cartoons, the knitted works, textiles, events that you've organised. And I was like, this is a really exciting body of work. And so, as you all know, Carrie, most of the time these things don't work out in terms of I was lucky enough to have a relationship with Norwich Castle and Art Gallery, because at the very end of that New Geographies project, where I basically staged walks across the east of England, the castle actually collected that work. They bought the idea of the performance of organising works with queer people. And actually it was the first time where I really felt that they were collecting my work in a way that they understood it even better than I understood it. Because originally we were kind of hoping to pass on some of the printed ephemera. And Rosie Gray, who was the curator there at the time, said, no, this is a performance work. We want to collect that. So I knew that Rosie was really exciting, and they just collected a Eva Rothschild performance. And so I dropped her an email and I said, could we somehow do a David Shenton retrospective? And I'd love to. I don't know how we do it, but I'd love to do it, and I'd love to be involved with it because I really believe in it. And most of the time, if you send an email like that, it's not possible because it's just no. We're planned for however many years or whatever. But she came back and she was like, "Yeah, I also want to live in a world where there's a David Shenton retrospective."
Wonderful.
So, do you remember where you were when I called you to talk to you about it?
I was volunteering for the country park, and we were actually moving a brewery from one site to another, and I was carrying this really heavy sink while you rang up, and I had to prop it against the garden wall, and you said, "Great news, Dave, you're having a retrospective," and I just thought I didn't believe him for word,
Because we talked a little bit about it before, in terms of, I remember that I met up with you in December. Yeah, and then I remember you just keep saying like, "I am trying to carry a kitchen," but that's really exciting.
Can I please put this sink down?
And that was about 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So then
maybe longer. Yeah, maybe 2 years ago. Yeah.
The process of
Amazing.
the behemoth process of working with the museum to make this happen has been amazing. They've got paper conservation departments and textile conservation and all that kind of stuff. So I think I would say very honestly, both in a really positive way. I didn't necessarily know what I was letting myself in for. I don't think we knew what we were letting ourselves in for in terms of actually staging what is this feels like the only word, a fucking massive exhibition.
It's massive.
In terms of just the spaces are huge, and then 60 years of work. So the show, that's what the show is. It's David's work from, I think the oldest item we're showing
75, I should think. Oh no, do you mean the oldest? Well, the oldest thing is the doll, really.
Is Sammy the Sailor.
Yeah.
Yes.
Maybe
you could tell us a bit about Sammy the Sailor, because I think it's gives us quite an insight into some of the ideas that are pertinent for you throughout the body of work.
Well, it's the kind of cornerstone of the whole exhibition, really, and my story, and the whole of 40 Lives. It's the first story in here, and it's my father was a poster writer for all the cinemas in Manchester. I'm from Ashton-under-Lyne, so it's all Ashton and Stalybridge and Duckingfield and Hyde, all those sorts of places. Did the cinema posters for everything. So we had free cinema tickets all the time, and so we used to go and see everything. We used to go 4 or 5 times a week, and so I quite learned already as a small child in sort of that kind of knowledge, and nobody else seemed to have that. But anyway, he and my mother would have a brother and a sister, and my dad ran this family of ours just by poster writing. So he made his living just by a brush, which is completely
Amazing.
Different from all other northern families where you worked in the coal mine or you worked in the factory. So I didn't know how bohemian we were, really. We were just growing up. He had his motorbike and the dog would sit on the pillion, things like that. You just took it for granted that this is the way of life. And after supper, it was just a small terrace house like Coronation Street, except my mother would never watch Coronation Street because she thought it was common. but we lived in this terrace house. And after tea, when the archers were on, my mother would say, "Oh, you'd either go next door to Mrs. Dodd or down the street to Mrs. Cartwright." We'd kind of shipped off somewhere so she could have a rest. And these are sort of, I suppose, women in their 50s whose husband may have died in the war. I don't know. And they just taught me to knit because that's a useful thing to do. We could play cards, but they taught me to knit. And so I could knit really proficiently by the time I was 8 or 9. But of course, my dad he hated to see me knit. Now, whether my grandma had actually tried to teach him or not, I don't know. And so I could knit, and I could knit jumpers, and then I found this doll at my grandma's, and I didn't know that. It turned out to be my father's doll. So it's his sailor. It's his sailor's doll, and I just started making this sailor jumpers and hats and little shoes and things. I knitted all these clothes for it, and my dad thought it was amazing when he saw the doll, but then he just lost his temper and threw the whole doll in the fire. And so I just managed to rescue it. And so this is in the exhibition, this doll, and all it's got is a burnt hand. So,
And he's got lovely little sort of velvety legs, hasn't he? He's a jolly little fellow.
He's a jolly little sailor, yeah.
But he's had a horrid life.
What does that represent for you, David? That action?
Well, that represent. I didn't know why. I mean, I've been taught to knit just by people teaching another child, not a boy child, a child how to knit, and I didn't understand why that was wrong and why he should be cross. Cross that he lost his temper and threw that doll in the fire. And then I realised that, I'm different. I'm different from normal boys, and I shouldn't be seen knitting. I mean, I used to suck my thumb as well, but
The least of your worries.
so it was that start, and that
Yes.
kind of turned me into a kind of rebel. Then when I got to school, grammar school, I would actually knit on the bus, and I would get kind of hit and called names. And that kind of prepared me for becoming a gay man and being used to being called names, because I didn't realise. I knew I was different, but I didn't know how I was different. And so this knitting, these verbalizations about my knitting are the same as the kind of insults you get for being gay.
Yes, it's a beautiful story of resistance too.
It is defiance. Yes, defiance. I've always been defiant. Yeah, and independent. It makes you independent as well. So I mean, my dad was independent, and as I say, he made his living. So that kind of independence and that sort of resourcefulness has been my lifestyle, really.
Yes. I think there's a couple of things that come to my mind there, which I hear from a lot of artists, and, not just gay or queer artists, but that somehow when parents or families understand some of the challenges of difference, in their era that they're growing up, there's some kind of protectionism kicks in. It's not just, I don't know if this is your experience, but being a signwriter, and being different from the community in a way was enough of a difference in a sense, and that actually understanding what it costs you to be different. Sometimes parents overprotect their kids, because they see that there's an additional cost to difference in society. And I wonder, in the way that his handling and the rest of your family, how did they support difference? And maybe I'm curious, because where you got the confidence to be defiant.
Well, I have an older brother, and he became a butcher because we were supposed to take over my dad's firm or to work for him, and I knew that would never ever work, and so and my brother knew it wouldn't work either, so he went off and became a butcher, completely different from being a signwriter. But that's the way you had to do it, really, because I knew that if we worked for my father, we would always be under the foot of him. We would never ever escape. And so, but he did send me to art school. Because when he was going to go to art school when the war broke out, and he got shipped off to war, so he got taken out of art school and had to go and fight in the war, and so I think he put me into art school. I mean, I had a full grant. I mean, he didn't have to pay any money, but
amazing.
He actually sent me to art school on purpose that I could take over his business. And I wasn't allowed to do fine art. I had to do printmaking, because he also went on to do screen printing. And we used to print the fruit, oranges and lemons that go around inside one-armed bandits and the sides of jukeboxes. So I was an adept screen printer by the time I was 12 or 13.
Amazing. Well, that obviously has contributed to the way that you think and make, because I think I studied printmaking too in Bradford, which is in the north of England, of all places. And I think there's something about the relationship between text and image that I think is really clearly supported in studying printmaking, and that's obviously stood you in good stead. But Ian, I'm curious, as to when you got this, you created this opportunity for you to do this retrospective, and you got Rosie saying, yeah, let's do it. You obviously, the knitted toy and the book, there's obviously a lot to unpack starting in those stories. So could you talk us a bit about how you started to develop the kind of the show so that it took on a life bit outside of the book and for the context of the castle?
Yeah, so the exhibition is being curated with Ruth Battersby, who is the senior curator of textiles at the museum. And Rosie, who now works at the Sainsbury's Centre, she put Ruth and I together in touch. She knew that Ruth was really enthusiastic about David's work and that they had already collected one piece of David's work, the Duvet of Love, which is this amazing duvet cover covered in activist badges, like a kind of pointillist picture that makes an image of two men hugging. So I think Ruth and I really talked about, the works that really stood out, the works that we already knew. And then it was just a case of David has been so generous. And one, you're actually an amazing archivist of your own stuff, aren't you? You've got boxes.
Cornflake boxes.
They're labelled, there are folders. When you drew a cartoon for Capital Gay, the gay newspaper, you then kept it in scrapbooks. So it was a case of coming here to your house, where your studio also is, and I guess you showing stuff to us. And I compiled a bit of a list based on the works and ideas that I'd seen in 40 Lies, the book, of like, oh, can I see this? And is there this? And I mean, you're so prolific that you would then say, oh, I've also got this. And, we thought we'd seen everything. And then one time we came here and you needed to get something out of the loft. And then we went up to the loft and there was all this other amazing work, these like huge, giant cartoon cutouts on cardboard. And so it's been a case of, familiarizing myself with what's here, what's possible. I think that, I might find a group, a person, something that's happened, and I'll find it really interesting, and I almost can't look away from it, and that's when I know that it's a subject matter that I want to work with. It feels strange to talk. I'm not talking about you as subject matter, David. And so in the past I've made films, or in the past I've even made like a full-blown play in collaboration with a playwright. But with this project, it didn't need any extra layers. I didn't need to make a film, or I didn't need to, I don't know, turn your life into a stage musical. We should definitely do that.
Well, let's do that next. Yeah, okay.
Oh my God, that would be so good.
And so making this exhibition, that felt like that was the container for this project, in the same way that when I made a play, I thought about the play as a thing. And so everything I do is kind of documentary in some ways. There's no artifice. So it's saying like, we're doing a retrospective, and so, it was just a case of looking for the standout works, looking for in the early 80s, you published the first ever LGBTQI plus graphic novel. So we had to have that. We had to have that in it. All your amazing work for a publication called Positive Nation, which was a magazine that really covered AIDS and HIV, both from an African perspective and from a kind of gay male perspective, and probably haemophiliacs.
Yes. Oh, yes. Everybody
it was this really broad magazine. And so that's an amazing archive of stuff as well. So I guess, we've looked at stuff and also thought what works really well as an exhibition, because actually the book 40 Lies does stuff that the exhibition won't do.
Yes.
And the opportunity to put physical works in space, that's what I see an exhibition being. So us getting to see the amazing cowgum glue and tape on the originals for Stanley and the Mask of Mystery, this first ever queer graphic novel, like that stuff, you know, the stuff that your eyes can touch and feel. So that's what I've responded to when kind of selecting works for this show.
I wonder if we could say a little bit, and perhaps David, you could chip in here, just in terms of what you observed between Ian as an artist curator and Ruth as a curator from the institution. How did they both respond to things differently, or did they? You know, and were you surprised by what they responded to?
Well, I've known Ruth a long time because I lived in Norwich from 1971 until 1990 and volunteered at the castle and before I moved away. So I knew that actually it was Lisa Little. She's the curator of Sheringham Museum now. But I've had connections here, all that, and then I moved to London for 22 years and came back, and those threads just fell back into place really. So I came home is what I've done, and so I've known Ruth and all the castle people a long time. But what happened with Ian is all of a sudden we're looking at my work through different eyes, and I've never thought of my work as the word art has never actually come into it so far. You know, it's just been work, and everything I've done is to earn my living, and I actually made my living through a pen and a piece of paper, and it's cheaper than being a window cleaner, really. So, and I've done that all, and I've actually made a really good. I do have a teaching degree, so I could, if things dried out, I could go and be a supply teacher, and so that's why I taught literacy in Norwich Prison, because it was a dry period. But I've always, so to then see my work and the attic full of work as kind of resource, and to look at it with a different sort of set of values, I still find it very, very strange, because I just look at that as work that's paid. I've already been paid for that work. And so, you know, you're very welcome to see it. So all that work has earned my money. I mean, I'm living in this house, and it's all been paid for by cartooning. And so you just have to, it's not really art. You've just got to be funny, or you've got to be serious, or you've got to be clever. You know, it's all that really. Art's the last thing in that list.
It's a very interesting perspective, and I think because it's really something that I really love for all the extraordinary creatives that I speak to, is that it's a life choice. It's a way of being in the world and a way of experiencing the world. So it feels like it's just what you do. But I think there is something about all of your work, what I've seen so far, and I am going to see the show, which I can't wait to see, is that there is a sensibility, of course, in everything that you do. So there's an approach, for want of a better word, which is a bit of a shit word really, which style. Everybody has a particular way of seeing and making and feeling their way through materials. And I think one of the things that I've observed, I trained as an artist, but I'm not a practicing artist like Ian. I think when I relate to artist-led shows, I think there's a real attention to materiality in a very beautiful way. But I think there's also that kind of the things that are highlighted, kind of the more slightly unusual things that perhaps have a life force about them, you know, that in a way. So I think from my perspective, I've really enjoyed working with artists on curating shows, because there's a way of thinking about the audience and the audience encounter when you own a space, or you run a space, or you inhabit a space daily. You're thinking about slightly different things. You know, so you're thinking about the architecture, the load bearing, the kind of the way that people come through the spaces. You're thinking about the choreography you've got all that expertise to bring to an artist. And then Ian's coming completely fresh into that space, thinking, oh, well, what if we kind of upended things a little bit, or showed things in this different way? So for a curator who's worked in a space for a long time, it's very exciting to also see your space reflected through an artist's eyes. And so I'm wondering, from your perspective, Ian, what did you learn about curating artists' work from working with both Ruth and David together?
It's such a good question because I still feel like I'm learning because we're in the process of it. And I think one thing that I love about how I work, but also I probably hate how I work, is that I jump into these different ways of working. So like last year I worked on a big film project, and it's slowly learning how to work with a film crew. You know, how does, I've made a couple of films, but like how can an assistant director help the project? Why are they needed? What's the focus pillar doing? Not just the technical side of it, but really how all that stuff works. So yes, I have worked with galleries and museums that are relatively sizable. So I've done commissions with places like NEMA in Middlesbrough, and been in like the London Open, a group show at the Whitechapel Gallery. So it's not my first time sort of engaging with a big institution, but I think the thing that I found really fascinating in terms of working here in Norwich is that the museum is an ecosystem that loads of people work inside of. They have a full-time design department who design the exhibitions. There's a model box that gets changed up. They do, I think at the moment they're going into the 2 exhibitions a year way of working. And there's, as we talked about, like conservation specialists. And so slowly understanding who is there, who needs to take part in this project, who wants to, who can assist, who can make it happen. I think that's why it's taken 2 years to do this, because there's technical processes and obviously exhibitions get booked in. But one thing I have learned really over maybe only the last 5 years is to quite early on in a project at a gallery or a museum, it's a kind of ask to try and kind of meet everyone a little bit, to go around all the departments. Because certainly when I did a project at MEMA, it wasn't until really far down the line that I realized that actually they had this amazing technician department that, again, were there salaried every single day. And I was kind of grappling with the budget for what I wanted to do. And I was thinking, God, how am I going to pay? How are we going to have enough money to get this wood cut that we need? And realizing that actually there was a team that really wanted to help and take part and could build stuff. So,
Yes.
So with this project, yeah, it's about learning how the museum works. It works really slowly because they're working really carefully, and sometimes, and I think you've been lucky maybe not to be part of these, there's sometimes there's meetings about meetings a little bit. And so there was a point maybe about 18 months ago where I realized, if I'm coming to Norwich, I should be I should be spending all my time with David and in the house and in the archive. And maybe there are meetings that I don't need to be part of, actually. And so I think I'm getting better as an artist, or really as a cultural worker, at realizing what's the remit of what can only I do. And there's some stuff that I don't need to be part of. And I love getting my fingers in all parts, and I'd love to think about what the poster's going to look like or what the merchandise is in the shop's going to look like. But actually I'm trying to get better at kind of trying to, like a horse blinkers thing of just trying to keep focused on the thing that makes me want to get up in the morning is David's amazing work, but also a more tactile side. Like, I am a maker. So a couple of things that we're doing for this exhibition is making a number of wallpapers and wall coverings. So when you first come in, there's going to be a wall that's going to be covered in thousands of David's cartoons from across the decade. So there's going to be this texture when you first come in. We're recreating this potato wallpaper. Will you tell the joke?
Wow.
Go on, tell the joke. At least just tell the pun.
I didn't speak to my father. He never spoke to me for about 12 years. And after it became his 75th birthday, and I thought, it's about time we actually spoke. So I bought him a present. And this is a clock that runs on potatoes.
Brilliant.
I don't know if you've seen them. You have
I
two
haven't.
potatoes, and one's got a bronze and one's got a zinc, and it's a different sort of, the difference between the two metals make electricity enough to make a clock go. And the joke that goes with that, he said, I've got a new job and I'm going to have to get a potato clock. I've got to get a potato.
Got it.
Get it? I know it's crap
I
joke.
do. No, I like it very much.
It's such a great pun. It's a pun that's over like 4 words rather than just one word. So they get a potato. Get up at 8 o'clock. 5 words.
5-worded pun.
A potato.
Got it.
Yeah, it's a 5-worded. Yeah.
And so for
from
example.
this- So you've
So we're
developed
making-
some potato wallpaper.
So you'd already drawn some potato wallpaper.
To go in the book. So it's in the book. It's
It's all in the book.
Yeah.
It's the last thing I drew in 40 Lives, the potato wallpaper. And Ian
Brilliant.
is fascinated by my northern upbringing, and so he's starting this exhibition in kind of the grim north with all these grim photographs. And so he decided that everybody in the north must have had potato wallpaper. And
So
it's
good.
It's dark
This is
green.
embellishing the truth,
It's
David.
dark
You're making me sound like
green
a
and there's
horrible
big
southerner.
loads- And I think it would actually make really great wallpaper. You might have to lighten the green in
Do you
the
know,
background.
I was going to ask you, are you selling it in the
would
shop?
That's the answer for the shop, David.
I think it would make. I think the potato. It would make a really good potato tote
I
bag.
think
would
I
be-
need some. I think I need some potato wallpaper.
We need
for
this.
Sure.
This is good input.
potato wrapping paper. It's just where it's
Yeah.
because I did textiles. You see, I did printed textiles at art school. So.
So we're getting to make all this amazing wallpaper.
Do you know, I wanted just to pull on one of the threads that you gave us there, which is that I think as an artist, often you're working on your own. Even if you're working to brief, you spend a lot of time on your own, don't you? And you have to carry a lot of the devising, conceiving the ideas, then producing, then distributing, then kind of marketing. You have to do all of it on your own.
Yourself. Yeah, it's all yourself.
So when you come into relationship with people who are experts at a very specific niche thing, you know, and part of it, I think what you're saying, Ian, so beautifully put, is firstly relinquishing some control, you know, and realizing
It's
that actually
difficult,
it's difficult because you want to stay so close to the creative control, which is, you know, so to have an incredibly strong creative output, which is both of your joint endeavor, you know, that is your legacy. So I think from being on both sides, I've worked with artists on making shows, but I've also been a curator working in an institution making shows and in commercial galleries making shows. And I think very often you're moving between these different spaces, and part of what people who work with you like is they want to get to know the artist really well themselves. So whether you're the front of house person, the person working in the shop, the person working in marketing, press, fundraising, you understand what to commit to for the next 6 months or however long the show's on for if you get brought into the artist world. So I love hearing the fact that you wanted to meet everybody in all the departments because, you know, if people get brought into your orbit at an early stage, they feel more wedded to the outcomes that you produce together. You know, and I think when I've experienced artists having a tough time with museums or with making shows, it's been very often they're so used to squirreling themselves away in the studio and then going, da-da, here's the thing, just promote it or whatever. And they're wondering why everybody wants to have all those communications and the meetings. And I think very often what happens is people get anxious about the thing that they don't understand. So because they're not an artist themselves, they don't understand the creative process or the nuance or the bits in between. They understand things from the bit that they need to know, you know, so like, am I going to get copy for this or images for that? Or what's the works list, etc. But actually, when you slow everyone down, you say, actually, let's just look at the process of this for a minute. People go, oh, okay, we understand why things might take longer or, you know, what have you. So I think the fact that you're willing to actually spend deeper time with David, but then introduce the work to those people is going to help for a stronger delivery of a show. But I also think your attention to those material things, like, can we produce the potato wallpaper? You know, like, I mean, fabulous. Because I think really for every artist that I've worked with, you know, the legacy of a show, you know, it's the run up to the show, the producing of the show, and then the dissemination or the experience of the show, and then who takes away what after the show is a way of carrying on those ideas. So I think you're absolutely right to be thinking about stuff for the shop and merch And also, who wouldn't want a bit of David Shenton to take home, frankly?
You're going to be able to buy it, Kerry.
Yeah. I'm very happy to hear that.
I can't find it.
Oh, there it is.
Oh, yeah, that's fabulous. So good.
It's great,
It's
isn't it?
fantastic. It's beautiful. And I think just to come back to that starting point then, Ian, you know, we talked about Sammy the Sailor, the toy, you know, and I'm curious in terms of you thinking about the stories that need to be told, Ian, how are you relating kind of David's experience and this work over 60 years? How are you thinking about making a bridge between people's experience today and what kinds of things you could draw out of the work to help bring people into relationship and see things through their own stories?
What's frustrating and amazing about what's happened for LGBTQI plus rights across this period of time, that really, you know, your work starts at the beginning of the decriminalisation in the UK of sex between men.
I suppose so, yeah.
And continues through the 70s, this time of positivity, of liberation, and then through the 80s and 90s, where we have obviously the AIDS crisis, and then through to today. Like the probably the most recent, one of the most recent works we'll show is actually something you've done throughout your career, which is to remix an image that you've made before. So David has this amazing image, I wonder if I can describe it, or you can help me describe it, of two people walking along, and one of them is holding a placard, and it says the baton of
the baton of inclusivity has been dropped,
and there's someone behind.
Activism, the baton of activism has been dropped, and that he has the word gay on, or they have the word gay on their T-shirt, and the person following them has the word trans on their T-shirt, and that one's holding a banner, and he's reaching down. He said, "Hang on, what's this?" So it's just picking up the baton that's just been dropped, because we as gay men can be looked on as being complacent, because our job is kind of done. We've got equal marriage, we've got we're plain sailing, but we're not there. I mean, the battle isn't over, but the baton has been taken up by the poor trans people, and they're pilloried all through America and all through, and you just and I just want everybody to, we have to look after them, they're part of my community, and so I can't see why some people in my community don't want trans people because who else is going to be on their side? Nobody. It's so we're still fighting, and I think we'll carry on fighting. What's going on across the pond. I mean, it's just the trans people are so easy to pick off, because they're the most vulnerable, and it's just so ridiculous.
Yes. Ian, I wonder if you could speak to this a little, because I did a session with my membership this morning, and there's a brilliant artist who is making political work at the moment, and it's very sensitive subject, really challenging, and the institution they were working with isn't able to show it at the moment. And it's something that's been coming up quite a lot for the community that I work in. And I answered it, but I wonder if you could say something about the sort of the challenges of making work where you need to have a strong voice, and that's through the creativity, but also in the care that you bring in terms of how you shape that experience for people. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit to your experience of dealing with that and how you think about it right now.
I guess it'd be helpful to talk about two things. Maybe to talk about this exhibition right now, and then also maybe to think a little bit about how there have been challenges in the past when bringing gay work into museums and public spaces, and how maybe at times that's been handled, as in not so sensitively. Yeah. But I think, David's work is cartoons, and most of those cartoons, I would say, are deeply political. And so we have works on the show that talk about Margaret Thatcher, and it's it's historic record that Margaret Thatcher didn't love the gays. There's the famous news clips of her talking about gays being pretend families, and she introduced Section 28, which was, you can't talk about being gay at school. And I was at school for that period. It didn't stop until 2004, I think, and I left high school in 2004. So that law of saying teachers can't talk to their students about gay people, that directly affected my upbringing. And I was okay. Like, I had a pretty good childhood and I had a pretty good time in school. I was very lucky in lots of ways. But there have been conversations about how do we include these works that are seemingly critical, I guess, of Margaret Thatcher. And the answer as I've been saying is that, it's historic record, and Margaret Thatcher didn't love the gays. And we have this amazing cartoon that we're going to make as a cutout that David drew of someone looking into a black hole in the floor, and it says Mrs. Thatcher's idea of an HIV drop-in clinic. And I think what's so amazing about that work is that, yes, it's really political, but you could read it from two totally different angles. You could think, oh, amazing, how funny, great, yeah, what a load of bullshit. We don't need these drop-in clinics. It's just a hole in the floor. Or you can see it how probably I am seeing it, most of us seeing it, in terms of just she is saying this big fuck you to our community. And like so many governments across the world at that point, they weren't helping cure what was just a disease and a virus that was killing people. And so I know one thing that the museum are doing in relation to David's show, which is really important, is talking to all of the docents, the people who are sitting in the gallery protecting the work. They're talking to them about the work, and they're saying, what questions do you think are going to come up for the public? And they are arming them with the historic knowledge. I think what I find hard, and I have to be really strong and challenging with that, is that it is still really hard for me as a human being, as a gay person, to hear that people might have a problem with me and our histories. And I guess I know it's really complicated because we're talking about Thatcher and conservatism, and we're in such a fractious time. But I'm really grateful for the care that the museum are doing, whilst also I'm really cautious of this idea of talking about predicting concerns and issues that the public might have, because even calling them concerns and issues feels like that there's a judgment there. And so hopefully by reframing it in terms of what questions do you think might come up. And I know that obviously the people who are sitting in the gallery every day, they're the front line, they're seeing the reactions. David and I won't be sitting in the gallery every single day. Maybe we could.
Might do.
But I've definitely had to learn over the years to cope with that framework that maybe needs to be put around work. And also to sometimes ask, sometimes is it needed? So I was doing a project with a gallery, and there was a conversation about whether there needed to be a kind of content warning in relation to the work. And the work was a display of the LGBT rambling group that I set up. So it was basically, it was more exciting than this, but it was like photographs and bits of people in rucksacks in coats walking around. So there was no nudity, there was no Tom of Finland, big cocks and bums and stuff. And so it was this confusing thing of like this being on this email thread saying, oh, what kind of content warning do we need for this? And we worked it through and realized that we didn't need a content warning to show photographs of members of the public walking in rucksacks. But it hasn't happened a lot throughout my career, and I'm certainly not looking for that stuff. But there are these micro moments that feel like kind of microaggressions where the subject matter is being misunderstood, or it's being feared, I guess, before it's even been maybe even looked at.
I wonder, David, if you could say a little something about that, because I think, I grew up in the 70s and I can see parallels, in terms of the times that we've been through. I'm sure over the decades you can see parallels where you think, mistakenly maybe that history is a linear process, that we learn and that we develop. But obviously, the older you get, you realise that actually we go round in different. It comes around again. And I'm wondering, in terms of this kind of rise in conservatism, which we see, which I find very surprising, I have to say, in the arts. I'm hearing it every day from artists, curators, academic, everybody that I coach and that are in my groups. And I really do understand that there can be a cost to putting your head above the parapet. I understand that. And I understand that it's not okay just to say that artists should be the canaries in the mine in this sense. Yeah. But I wonder, what's your take on managing that personal cost to saying what needs to be said?
This show is going to be on in Norwich. If this show was going to be on in London, it would be so much easier to put on. But Norwich is a small city, and and the castle is family friendly. And so we have to make concessions of what we want to say and what we can say. And we've got the local elections coming up next week. Then there are all the county council elections. So the castle is run by the county council, not by the city council. And the county council is that much more staid. And so anything could happen. In fact, I was worried that the exhibition would go on, but now I've been given the assurance that it is going to go on. But we've had to say that sometimes we're going to have part of the show just shown after hours. So there's going to be after hours shows. So and with not with warnings, they're just going to be after hours shows, and so we can actually do more. So it's going to be kind of like a flexible exhibition.
I guess what's going to happen is that there's a number of objects that, as David said, because the museum is open to the public, and that the exhibition, whilst it's this solo exhibition, it's part of your entry ticket to the museum. And I guess the way I think about the museum is it's a bit like the British Museum or the V&A in terms of they have a section for contemporary art, and then they also have a section with, I don't know, a stuffed otter in, I guess. And may the two mix. And so, the museum are thinking about how can that ecosystem of a 12-year-old running through, how does that work? And so there are a number of really powerful works that David has made that speak to me. So particularly there's this, the Pashmina of verbal abuse that includes homophobic slurs, and I guess technically includes swear words. And so there's this idea that maybe those objects need some careful handling in terms of how they're presented to audiences, because, people read labels, but lots of people don't read labels. So if we have a big homophobic slur word on the wall, does that make it acceptable? Does that mean you can call it someone? No, it doesn't, obviously. So I think that by bringing these objects out, like after hours, which actually sounds quite fun, I think, that means that they can be brought out in discussion and with care. And yes, would I love that object to be out in the exhibition all the time? Probably. But I think we've got away with quite a lot of stuff as well.
Just to be clear, I think the museum are, working with you on a really beautiful, important show. So I think when I was thinking about this rising conservatism, I guess it's more in terms of across the arts. I think there are a number of things. There's a social, political, economic climate. And then there's also the weird self-policing through social media, that is impacting on creative people massively, where we're actually so aware of how we might be perceived that we're concerned about having a voice or saying our point of view in case, it separates us from our tribe in some way. And I think the reason that I like bringing brilliant people on the podcast like you is, I really want people to understand that there are more people like us out there, that really want to celebrate difference, but also it's not just about the objects, but at that sort of understanding and acceptance of nuance and difference, but also what it adds to the way that we think and behave and look and experience the world is really important. And if we all self-police to the point where we don't show up and say what needs to be said, then actually we end up with a really banal but also dangerous society, which we're seeing. So I think, I guess it's that, I'm glad that you two are doing the show together. I think it's wonderful, an intergenerational, interdisciplinary show that really shows what the power of creativity can do. And I think one of the things I love about your work so much, David, that Ian is so gorgeously bringing out or drawing out, is the power of the line. The power of the pen, the power of, which you're obviously doing, is that from your desk, when nobody is looking, that you can say what needs to be said, and that passing the baton by showing it to one other person, sharing it with one other person is like, I can say this, you can say this too. I can be this, you can be this too. 100% is so important. So, I'm really glad that you kept going. I'm really glad that Ian, is also supporting you in terms of introducing it to the world. But nevertheless, I wonder if we could touch a little bit more on how you make sense of 60 years, because it's also something that I know our listeners grapple with. When you've been making for so long, it's really, how do you give people enough entry points without giving them so much that they can't actually find a path through it? So how are you thinking about the kind of the navigation of the show, Ian and David?
Well, a lot of those paths have changed, haven't they, really, because there's no papers anymore. So a lot of entry points have disappeared. And the only time I can actually put something across is on a social media platform, I think. And so I've been doing that for a while. And I did something, a weekly diary called Been There, Seen That. And that was kind of carrying on the politics. And my friend Greg said, "You're the most political cartoonist by not being one." And so my politics actually comes through the ordinariness and the way, if you tackle it head on, everybody in the newspapers tackles it head on, but you can actually just be the voice of the ordinary person, wondering. That's what I've done all the way through. I've never sort of said anything definite. I'm just wondering what's going on, really, and so you leave the question open for the viewer to answer it.
No, I get that. And I love that, the idea of the ordinary asking what's going on. I love that.
Yes.
So in terms of how you're curating the show together, so thinking about, is that invitation, how are you providing those invitations or touch points through the show?
Well, and the other part, going back to what this is a cartoon show, so it's going to attract children, it's going to attract younger people because it's a cartoon, and parents are going to say, "Oh, there's a cartoon show on the castle." Do you see what I mean? So it's more important to do these after, if it was a painting exhibition, parents probably wouldn't take children to it. They wouldn't go and see a sculpture exhibition. I mean, they've had all sorts of people on at the moment. But we had Colin Self. I don't know if you know Colin Self.
I love Colin Self, yeah.
Well, he was the exhibition, not the last one, but the one before. And that exhibition gave me so much confidence because he rips up cardboard boxes and makes them into beautiful pictures. And he's this kind of got the same ethics as me, really, where you actually make something out of nothing. And it's got a sense of humour. And you've got to know, you recognise the sense of humour, and that exhibition touched quite. I mean, I knew him from the 60s when he used to do all these cinema kind of pictures, with lighting. Yeah. But that Colin Self exhibition really gave me the confidence to go ahead with this. Otherwise, I wouldn't. I would have been too frightened.
Yeah. That's such a great connection point. Actually, I still remember Colin Self's, I think it was like a leopard skin missile sculpture.
That's right. Yes, that was in
Yes. Was it? Oh,
yeah,
God, I loved that. It stayed with me literally for decades. But I think that's a great, so humour And the fact that actually the methodology or the process of cartooning is a way of bringing people through. Yeah. And then you can open up some of those wider discussion points. So what are you thinking, Ian, in terms of how people might respond, or are there moments of engagement or invitation to reflect or contribute something in the show?
So there's a couple of things that we're doing, I guess, to help ground people. So David has made these amazing cardboard cutouts of figures and queer icons and points of his life. And so there's this, what is it, 20 meters, that wall?
20 meters wall. I've actually drawn a 20-meter wall.
It's a parade. So we're making like an alternative timeline that starts with your birth and continues to now. And that in text form, it kind of chronicles things like, as we said, the decriminalization of sex between men in the UK, or I don't know, when AIDS first starts in the UK.
A historical timeline. And then the secondary timeline, which is my timeline, that sort of scribbles all the way through it and crosses that now and again, and then goes on a detour. So it's like a parade across the top. And that's not chronological. I think you think it's going to be, but it's not. And then there is a timeline that's, the timeline of all the things that have happened, LGBT tragedies and everything that's happened in the past 60 years. And then my timeline, which is a scribbly line that goes in and crosses it from time to time. And there'll be images, photographs and bits of my work sort of.
And we've got things like your tote bag, your peg bag from the London Zoo. So we've got there's no hierarchy in terms of, like, there's everything in there, isn't it? From your London Zoo peg bag through to, the most exquisite painting that David has made. So I think in terms of I think what you're saying, in terms of access points, the show's really visual. So there's these like meter high cutouts of people walking across the wall, this big parade, and then you can dive down below and read captions about what's happening in 1972, for example. And then I also think that the range of work, so yes, you drew for The Guardian for years, you drew for the Gay Press for years, you drew for loads of publications, but also you've made all these amazing textile works as well. So I think there are some really seminal works in the show that will just attract people. And I mean, maybe you can tell people a little bit about the Duvet of Love, because I think that's our Mona Lisa, isn't it? It is, David.
Well, it's a sad story, really, because I lived in Norwich, and me and my partner decided we'd move to London because he was a nurse. And we had friends dying in London, and I said we should really go there because you could help, and because I was drawing safer sex leaflets and working for the health education authorities, and I said we should really move to London because we could probably do more. I'd had 2 friends die in Norwich. And so we went there, but we lived in a bungalow that was made of asbestos here in Norwich. And so he went and became a head at the London Hospital, and I had to wait behind to sell the house. And by the time I got there, he'd found a new partner.
Oh.
And she...
Double surprise.
And so we kind of split up, and I went back into a bedsit. So my first year in London was really, really miserable. And I've been collecting all these badges, and so and I had a black duvet on my bed. So I just pinned all these badges to symbolise those 2 people in Norwich who died. And in the bottom corner where all the HIV badges were and the red ribbons and things, I just wrote Duvet of Love. And it wasn't meant as an art object. It was meant as some sort of comfort, really, for me, because of the people I've missed. It was a memorial thing. And it stayed in this on my wall or in a box. And when I came back to Norwich, I just put it in an exhibition because because a lot of the badges were from Norwich in the first place.
Yes.
And so it's now really it's my AIDS quilt, if you like, although it's not a quilt, it is my personal AIDS quilt to celebrate Martin and Nicholas. But it's not a picture of those. It's a picture of my two cartoon characters from my comic strips.
Yeah, it's the profile of two men facing each other and hugging each other as well. It's a very simple image, but it's really powerful, and it has. I guess it has that. It's like, you know, the cliche of the oil painting, that it looks different from afar to close up. So you get this image of two men hugging, and then when you go closer, you can then see obviously the beautiful artistry of all of those badges, which must have been made by thousands of different creative people. And so the badges themselves are this amazing archive of activism and the places you've been as well.
Yes, it's like a portrait and a landscape simultaneously.
That was accessioned by the castle, you know, straight away after I showed it again in Norwich. They just swiped it really, and that really was the start of this kind of relationship I have with the castle, because they've been so supportive of everything I've done. That so there are several things I've made, and they've said, "Oh, I'll have that as well. We'll have that as well." You know,
because it's all so good.
It is so good. I'm curious, Ian, as to what you've learned about living a creative life from working with David.
I think that we work really differently in terms of David as your sort of, you know, you for years, right? You were working weekly or maybe not daily, right? But
daily.
You'd have to hit the newspaper's deadline to get that cartoon to the Guardian to be printed that night.
Yeah, 11 o'clock they'd ring up and say, "Can we have it by 4?" So I mean, you'd be just about to go to bed. Yeah, a cartoon to do before you go to bed, and it's got to be there by 4.
And so I think what I've learned through David is that, like, obviously that's such a fast way of working. And actually, I think that obviously you're so intelligent and you're so skilled as a cartoonist that you can jump right to the kernel of the idea. And I would love to be able to speed up my process. Most of the projects I work on are 2 years of actual kind of lived doing, and maybe most of the time like 2 years of thinking about, is this what I want to do? Is this what I'm interested in beforehand? So it's really rightfully protracted, my process. So I think what I have loved by working with David is, one, every so often I think to myself, I remember thinking this with people like Picasso, like, wow, they're making so much work. And like I think you have made so many pieces of work and so many leaps and just moved through so many ideas that I would love to be able to get that amount of ideas out in my lifetime. And I don't think I'm going to, because I don't think that's the way I work. I think COVID was a really important time for so many artists. Like, I had to work in a really different way. Museums were closed. I couldn't do public projects. So I made a smaller, quote unquote, quicker work, which was this candle that smells like the first gay pride. So I spoke to people who walked in the 1972 central London gay pride from Trafalgar Square through to Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park. And so that was so great because it was really mobile. It was this scented candle that could be posted out to people's houses. And I'd love to make something like that again, that it was satisfying because it was self-funding. I kind of pre-guessed that I could sell some, so I could fund it myself. It didn't have to be this. I didn't really need a partner in terms of funding partner or institutional partner. So I think what working with David does make me think about is, alongside these behemoth projects that I work on, how do I create space for smaller works to happen as well, that are more playful, I think, and
lovely,
immediate maybe.
Love that. Thank you. David, what have you learned from working with Ian so far?
It is a different way of, it's that looking back and you think, yes, there is a lot of work, and yes, you probably could do it. And if it hadn't been for Ian, it would have just stayed in the loft. You know, I mean, it would. I'm coming up to 77 now. You just think, oh, do I? and so it is rejuvenating, I have to say, and frightening, and some things that you thought you'd put behind you. You know, that sort of It's not ambition really so much, because there's no. Do you know what I mean? But it is that impetus, isn't it, to see what's next. It sort of stretches your horizon to another 10 years.
Yeah. I love that. I think it's so right that you can be a curious person who wants to keep seeing what's possible forever. There isn't an end date on it.
No.
But I think very often I'm not saying yours has, because you have such a brilliant life, David, but I think for a lot of us, the rest of society has this kind of retirement story in some way. And people believe that worlds shrink as you get older, but we have to proactively participate still, don't we?
Yeah,
and it takes a bit of energy and a bit of effort to do that. But I think brilliant things happen when we commit to participating, don't they? And, people add value to us and we add value to them in ways that we hadn't anticipated. And if it's one thing that I hope people listening to the podcast will take away, is that, I really believe in taking radical responsibility for sharing the work through enthusiasm. And I think what you will pick up, and I'm going to share, this book is so good. So 40 Lies, a work of I can't even say it, David, but ipsedixitism.
Ipsedixitism,
yeah. Ish Pish Make a Wish by David Shenton. I think, there is the idea of making complex ideas accessible to a broader public. I think for both of you is something that I really want to celebrate. Because actually that commitment to doing so with all of the complexity and nuance that is necessary to understand the world's complexity, but bringing joy, humour, playfulness, even to really challenging moments, and times, I think is a really worthwhile pursuit. So thank you for doing it, but also for sharing some of your story. And I think there's one thing I really love about your approach, Ian, which is like working with elders and people who have walked the path before you. I say that because of how Ian expressed he's drawn to talking to people who have experienced life differently. And I think that's a really interesting commitment in your own practice, isn't it? Is that actually there's my way of doing things, but then how have people done things before and what can I learn from them? I think it's a really beautiful addition.
Yeah, and I guess funnily, it's not something I've actually done consciously. I think when I was young, I thought that, when you're an artist, that you have this real sense of what your practice is. And it's, I graduated from the Slade in 2012. So that's,
12 years, 13, 14 years.
A long time. And I think that I thought that I would be kind of almost like the active author of my practice, whereas I feel it's the other way around. I look back and I understand the things that I've done are my practice, and that there are recurring themes. And when I'm in it, when I'm doing it, it doesn't feel like a recurring theme. It has to feel fresh each time. But of course, once you go down a sort of path of research in terms of thinking about the 70s, as I've said, like pioneering activism, like there's so much in that time, so much creativity in the activism, so much like hilarity, street theatre, songs, magazines and newspapers being made and drawn in, that there's this kind of wealth. And getting to talk to the people that did that, I find that really inspiring. I'm an artist because I love art, and I loved looking at art books. I remember in my school we had this shelf of those cheap Taschen art books, and I just used to love looking at the work. Like I love art and how it's made. I'm interested in how it's made, and so getting to make work about and with other makers is the seed of my practice. Yes, subject matter wise, it's this LGBTQI plus history, but actually formally it's about making and makers. And one of the definitions of being an extrovert is that you recharge around other people, and I think that is true for me, that I want to be with other people and I want their energy as well to lift me up. And actually when you were speaking then, I realized that like in your generosity and talking about what David and I are doing, that actually I felt this like physical softening happening across my shoulders and body, because that conversations and speaking like kindly and interestingly, they've got to be recharging, right? And so thank you for saying the things that you said as well, because I think sometimes, you know, sometimes there's a fear, I think, when you're sharing ideas or when you're sharing archives, that it can feel quite literal in a way. But you're right,
Yes.
like when these works are in museums and galleries, you are sharing ideas with people who don't have the knowledge that you have. Each artist's practice is a specialism, right? And I am always thinking about, how can the audience connect with this? I want the audience to connect with the ideas. The audience are first in my mind, because we are putting these works in space. We want people to leave their homes to come to the space and see them. So it needs to be exciting, engaging.
I have no doubt it's going to be. I think, David, there was something I wanted to share with you, because it reminded me when you were speaking. It's something I hold very dearly from when I was growing up. My mum used to run women's refuges, and she set up lots of women's refuges in the Midlands, you know, and my dad used to write protest songs. So I was always taken either on marches or on like to folk clubs where they were singing protest songs. But one of the marches that I was taken on by my mum was it was a rights kind of festival, and they'd created a Punch and Judy cutout for women's refugees, and we were on the float kind of going through, and but there was something about that cutout, it stayed in my mind forever. And when I picked up your book and I was looking through it, and I was thinking how important, like where this, if you saw the village that this float went through, I mean, really, the fact that they made the effort to do this procession that went through different villages and small towns in Shropshire. I'm saying this because there are so many creative people listening that very often they feel lonely, and they feel like, why is it worth it? You know, is it worth making the effort to do these things? And I think it's so important to share that, you know, like, so not only did being taken on those marches when I was a kid, you know, it shaped my worldview, and the fact that we've all got some agency, we can all contribute to things being different, but the visuals that accompanied it, you know, so any activism or visuals or marches, I think is so important, you know, that, and creative people contribution, it doesn't have to be like big grand gestures, you know, it can be as small and simple. And I think something you said in, when I was at Somerset House, I worked with Claire Cattrall, curated the Good Grief Charlie Brown show at Somerset House, and I worked on it with her. And one thing I learned from Charles Schutz was, you know, 50 years of showing up to deliver a cartoon that actually did have some political contribution. You know, he was the first person really to put a black character in his cartoons, to have a feminist, you know, in some of those early cartoons. And I didn't realise that the process of him showing up and committing to trying to say a complex thing simply, you know, it was, of course it was artwork, you know, but also that the homes that those ideas were distributed amongst were a really broad and diverse audience. That was a radical gesture. And yet there are, you know, sometimes in the art world, we like our silos, even though we pretend we don't, do you know? And I think what I love about what you're doing here is in choosing to work in the institution that you're working in. Yes, you've understood that there are certain things that you're having to consider, but it's 100% worth it, because the impact of people experiencing the show that you're doing in that setting, in that place, is totally different. It's totally different from doing it in New York or London or a major city. It's going to blow some people's heads off, you know, and what an incredible gift of generosity, you know, for doing that. So thank you for sharing your stories with us and for telling us a little bit about what you're doing. I wonder if you could share, as we kind of come to the close, what has this invigorated or reinvigorated for you in terms of what you both want to continue doing or do next? What has it given you ideas for in terms of what you're going to do in your individual practices moving forward?
I'd like to see this one over.
We need a big rest, don't we? I know. That's what I was thinking.
It's a little bit previous.
I'm doing this one, and I'm also there's a new Quentin Blake museum opening up next month, and I'm in that one, and there's an exhibition in Angoulême, and that's called Comics, but QU-omics, comic, and so I'm in 3 exhibitions, and if only this had happened 30 years ago, it would have been
there's no time like the present, David. Where is Angoulême?
It's sort of like middle of France, really, but it is the comic centre of the world, really. So I mean, it's
why do you say that? Because there's lots of comics based there, or
no? It's just that's where they always have an annual comic festival, and it's bigger than.
Have you been before? Did you know about it?
I've never ever been. No, I've never ever been.
When is it? Can we go?
Oh, amazing.
We can. It's in July, I think. So everything's happening in
the
same week. Yeah.
It's like buses, David. What can you say?
It's true. So I mean, I'm not going to give up. I'm not going to stop. But at the moment, I would like to say, this is my career here. And so I can actually not put a lid on it, but do you know what I mean? You can package it and say that now I've got this much. I'm not going to say how much time I've got there, but I could do something completely different. I mean,
what are you going to do?
It'll still be the same old rubbish.
It's a good job you're not in marketing, David, I must say. How about you, Ian?
Oh, what am I going to do next? Or what does it make me think next?
Yeah, what's it making you think about in terms of what you want to attend to next in your own work?
I think that definitely I want to make more. I think that there has been creative thinking in this process, but I think that a lot of what I've realized, and you'll be like, yeah, Ian, I know, like a lot of curating, it feels like organizing an admin. And so what I'm looking forward to doing next year is probably some clay work, some public performances.
Nice.
I'm really interested in Highbury Fields, this park near my house where actually the first candlelit vigil protest ever in the UK happened. So that's a space that I'm really charged by and interested in kind of getting my teeth into and thinking about how those kind of queer histories of cruising and parks in London can be shared as well. It's interesting. I think you've spoken about this before, Kerry, on the podcast, this idea of working in projects. And over the last 10 years, I've worked in these really big project containers, these kind of 2-year behemoth things. And I do love that. And I am drawn to big ideas and big challenges. But yeah, I'm thinking next year, I might kind of close the doors up a little bit. And I might go back into making ink paintings and think all those COVID year things and just see what happens if I'm not kind of pushing stuff out into the world for a little bit. And I think that would be quite timely as well with having a young family as well. I think I've kind of driven forwards and outwards and loudly quite a lot for the last 10 years. And I'm really proud of some of the things I've got to achieve and some of the institutions I've worked with. But I'm kind of wondering, what if I kind of make a bit more quietly for a while and see what comes out, really.
That sounds very exciting. For our listeners, could you tell us the dates and duration of the show? And so that if they can't visit, they can also check out online.
I think it's from the 18th of July. Okay. We couldn't work out when the private view was, basically. We both invited people on the totally wrong dates. But and then it runs through to January of 2027.
January the 10th. It's amazing. It's 6 months.
Wow.
It's just so
it's fantastic. So exciting.
Really,
And where can they find more about you both individually?
Just online, I suppose, really. So
what's your handle, David?
I've got an Instagram page, and that's just is it at or is it just hashtag? I don't know.
I think at.
It's just D.Shenton. D.Shenton.
Great.
Full stop D. Or I've got my Facebook pages, which is my name, David Shenton, or I have another one, but I never use it, and that's called These Foolish Things.
Nice. And do you have a website too?
No, I gave up that.
You don't need one. You're too big for a website.
Well, nobody reads websites. They just read Facebook, don't they? No, I don't have a website.
How about you, Ian?
For people to stay in touch. So Instagram, I'm at Ian Giles. I do have a website, which is iangiles.co.uk, which I keep pretty updated in terms of projects.
And the museum website? Do you have?
Norwich Castle Museum and Art Gallery, I think. You'll have to check it, Kerry. I'm sorry. It's so many words. I will check
it, don't worry. Yeah. Thank you so much. Well, best of luck with the show. No doubt it's going to be a Bobby Dazzler. So thank you so much for sharing. And can't wait to see all of it come true. And for everybody listening, please do also check out 40 Lies, David's gorgeous book.
Gorgeous.
Thank you. It is gorgeous. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Kerry. Really nice to talk with you.
A few things from this conversation will stay with me. The first is the political through the ordinary. David's friend once told him he was the most political cartoonist by not being one. He never declares, he wonders. The line drawn at a desk when nobody's looking. Small acts that travel further than they look. The second is what it means to be seen by another generation. David spent 60 years making work that paid the bills and was never quite called art. It took Ian, 40 years younger, to insist otherwise. Tea, listening, 2 years of meetings, that is intergenerational care. And for anyone who suspects their best work is behind them, David is 77. This retrospective has stretched his horizon by another 10 years. There is no retirement story here, only the next thing. The work you make at your kitchen table when nobody is watching may turn out to be the archive of a generation. Keep going, pass the baton when it's time. Thank you for spending this time with me. If something landed with you, please share it with one person who needs to hear it. And come and find me on Instagram at kerryhand and join thousands of creatives reading my weekly newsletter at kerryhand.com/subscribe for practical advice straight to your inbox every Friday. Until then, keep making the work that only you can make.